Chapter 12. An interview with the Sebastocrator of Byzantium and the Holy Grail. A pact and a plan. Emissaries for Lord Reynard. Discourse with a beast who mourns the Golden Age. It was not a dream, for the actions we take in dreams need not affect our waking lives, but it resembled a dream. The light which shone on this other Nuremberg was the light of 1,000 senile suns, old light, dark gold and dull red, amber and ochre, the light of autumn stars diffused by a twinkling haze, which was the fabric of some earlier universe, rotted and turned to dust. Shreds of weary starlight fell intermittently upon the bulk of the great town, making black marble gleam, reflecting a misty sepia above us, before again becoming one with the massive silhouette. It was a unique illumination which set the city to moving like a slow ocean, creating shadows, sudden detail, so that not only buildings but faces were forever revealing a different aspect, displaying a character which, because of that inconstant definition, possibly only existed in one's imagination. One's senses had constantly to be re-examined beneath the autumn stars. Yet, taking Prince Miroslav's carriage to the Sebastocrator's palace, I was surprised to find streets and squares still filled with ordinary business, men and women opening up their shops and stalls, children tumbling and laughing, dogs barking, wagons of produce moving too slowly for impatient coachmen, self-satisfied merchants singing their songs of success and importance behind the sheets of the morning press as they filled the familiar coffee-house benches. Apprentices and schoolchildren trudged the routes of unwelcome learning. Young women put before the world the results of their 2-hour toilets. Bucks perambulated with such practised posture they might have been the chorus in some vast performance of the ballet. Save for the light, that ancient light, the jet and obsidian of the oversized architecture, we could have been in Weimar or Leipzig. Yet I seemed the only one to notice. Libussa leaned back across from me, lost in her own reveries of some gigantic destiny. St. Oddrin asked Klosterheim if Satan's ex-general was familiar with the works of Dolbach. There was an Albach, said Klosterheim, in Bavaria. He tried to recall what he knew. I believe he was nicknamed the Butcher of Nuremberg, but that was 2 or 3 centuries ago. Did he hang living women on hooks? I refer to the French philosopher, sir. Système de la nature? But Klosterheim dwelt in the glory of his memories when his Albach had doubtless been a recruit in the hosts of hell, and St. Oddrin had to raise his voice. De Holbach has written lucidly, sir, about such things as these strange stars, or suns, he says, and forgive me if I render this poorly into German, are extinguished or become corrupted. Planets scatter across the wastes of the sky. Other suns are kindled. New planets formed to make their revolutions and describe new orbits. And man, an infinitely minute part of a globe, which itself is only an imperceptible point in the immense whole, believes the universe made for himself. Eh, sir? My lady stirred and glowered. One expects such stuff from Voltaire. These men invent cosmologies to avoid responsibility for their moral crimes. By reducing all to universal movement, one may cheerfully continue to maintain one's behaviour, no matter how unjust. I sometimes believe Galileo invented the cosmos to avoid his wife's misery. St. Audrin answered mildly. Well, maybe so, madam. I was merely impressed by Dolbach's observation. The coach advanced now across a mighty ceremonial square in which, lost in darkness, were tall columns bearing statues. A fountain of black water flumed at the centre. A pool of mercury swirled and reformed under the action of the cascade. And out of that agitated mixture of incompatible elements occasionally leapt glittering red shapes, elongated, fish-like, fanged, some 5 yards long. We were the only vehicle upon the black marble pavement, and our horses' hooves set a distant echo. I leaned from the window. Ahead was a great 3-winged palace on some 6 or 7 floors, of white and black stone with complicated multicoloured mosaics laid into it, with gilded domes and steeples, reminding me of my days in Samarkand. They were more oriental than European, yet not wholly Eastern. The palace was surrounded by rails of silver and dark jade. Behind these was a wide courtyard, and then the arched entrance to the palace. Guards were present, formal and dignified. They wore a uniform of feathered helmet, short sleeveless jacket over embroidered shirt, baggy silk trousers and boots. But for their features they might almost have been Cossacks. They were armed with pikes and short curved swords. Reaching them, the coach stopped. Prince Miroslaev's coachman handed down a sealed sheet which the guard captain opened and read, becoming clearly impressed. He folded up the paper, saluted and bowed to us. My lady, your excellencies. The coach entered the gate and crossed a courtyard, passing under an arch hung with heavily embroidered banners, many showing scenes and portraits reminiscent of the icon at Miroslav's house. Then we were within the central bailey, lit with huge lanterns suspended from posts and brackets all the way to the top on 4 sides. The coach drew up at the bottom of a flight of steps down which more soldiers now marched. A tall man in a robe of green and white, wearing over this a checkered cloak and with a soft velvet cap upon his grey head, descended from behind the guards. St. Audrin climbed out first, helping Libussa to the ground. Then Klosterheim, moving awkwardly, joined them. I was last, and the man in check was already hailing us with, "Welcome, honoured strangers. The Sebastokrator greets you. I represent him as he represents our emperor and our despot. I am called the Pan-Kuiper Sebastos Andreas." He took a rolled parchment which Klosterheim handed him. This merely contained our names and part of our purpose there. He read it slowly, rolled it up again, and ushered us forward. The palace was so brightly illuminated it might have been day. The walls were massive mosaics from roof to floor, depicting scenes of battle, courtship, love and trade. The pillars were all marble, also set with gold mosaics. From time to time we passed along decorated alcoves containing benches and cushions. The interior reminded me somewhat of Catherine's Kremlin court. This Nuremberg seemingly retained more of her Slavic character than her counterpart. Yet nowhere did I see the Christian cross, though I had been told the Mittelmarch had her share of Jesus' followers. Turning sharply, then turning again, we reached the beaten brass and gold doors to what proved to be the throne room, described by the Pan-Kuiper Sebastos as the receiving chamber. There, without guards or courtiers, reading a book as he sat with legs crossed in an enormous chair of granite and silver, was the Prince of Nuremberg, her Sebastokrator, but not, we'd been warned, her emperor or despot. He was a heavily bearded man, and on his head he wore a wooden crown set with rubies. His eyes were small, well-spaced, clever. His rosebud mouth made him seem at first a popinjay. He was fleshy, in need of exercise and open air, but when he spoke in rich musical tones rising from his throne, laying his book carefully on the seat, he was evidently a man of substance. He descended the steps to meet us. "In the name of the despot and the emperor, I welcome you to New Constantinople, capital of the world to be." Well, Klosterheim was our spokesman for that occasion. "We thank Emperor and Despot both for their hospitality, and we thank you also, Lord Sebastocrator. My name is Johannes Klosterheim, known sometimes in the Mittelmarch as Wandering Johannes." "Aha! The same whose soul was put back in him after the battle at the edge of heaven." "The same, Lord." The prince looked searchingly at Klosterheim, then relaxed to listen as the man continued. "May I introduce Libussa, Countess Cartagena e Mendoza Chilperic, Duchess of Crete." The bearded ruler brightened. "Of Crete? Are you free of our conquerors at last?" She bowed deeply, kissing his extended hand. "Sadly not, my lord, yet that is my title. My ancestors were born there." "Von Beck," said Klosterheim next. The Sebastocrator raised his brow. "The same as slew you?" "A descendant, lord." I was privileged to kiss the royal rings, as he had said graciously, "Greetings, my dear Count." I made no effort to explain what my father still lived and was the present Graf. St. Audrin was last, approaching the fingers with a flourish, as if his lips graced the hand of a Gainsborough belle. "Honoured sir, your servant. I've no old blood, I fear, no inherited quest, no special destiny, no history of resurrection. I'm merely the boatman who ferried this trio across whatever divides my world from yours." "Ah, the balloonist. They informed me as soon as I awoke, and I should like to see your machine, sir." "I should be delighted, Your Honour, to demonstrate her powers." "It shall be included on our calendar." The Sebastocrator rubbed one half-shut eye, yawning. "Forgive me, I am as yet not fully awake. This hibernating has much to recommend it, but 'tis devilish hard to rouse from." "Has your Honour always slept through Nuremberg's summer?" "Always, sir. I took the vow, you see, not to look upon the sun until Emperor and Despot are both restored to us." "Are they prisoners, Your Honour?" The Sebastocrator was disbelieving. "Know you nothing of our history or our doom?" St. Audrin made a repentant gesture. "It is my first voyage here." The Sebastocrator laughed in apparent delight at my friend's ignorance. "Of course. Yet in your world lies the source of my vow. In 1453 our Emperor Constantine died at Byzantium's St. Romanos Gate. He defended his city and his religion against Mohammed II, lord of the Osmanli Turks. When the emperor fell, so did the city, and the Turkish sultans have ruled there for over 300 years. Constantine's successors and the remnants of our legions marched through Thessaly and Macedonia, seeking a citadel to command which they might dedicate to those they worshipped. When they entered the mountains east of here, they suffered starvation, exposure, and hopelessness. Then it was that Stephen Palaiologos, our newly elected emperor, opened his heart to any being who would listen, promising his own soul, his own life, if others would be granted a sanctuary from Turks, Bulgars, and Serbians. He received a vision. The Byzantines would be granted the boon he craved, but until their capital was restored to them, or their descendants, they must cease to practice their religion, though they need not deny it, whereupon they should find the sanctuary. After much debate, the Byzantines agreed, believing they should easily, in a year or two, find new allies and restore their city to her former beliefs. Next day they made their way from summer to winter. They had entered the Mittelmarch. Another day and they had discovered the settlement, already a rich trading city, cosmopolitan and tolerant, but under threat from a demonic tribe, half-beasts, who had wandered into the valley in search of game and loot. In return for their hospitality, Stephen, his despot, Andreas Caractolus, and their soldiers destroyed the demons, sparing only a few for slaves. The grateful city invited my ancestors to rule them, and this have we done ever since, until the day comes when we must leave Nuremberg to fight against the Turk. You are not yet strong enough for that? Another important matter holds us here. Since we settled, it became clear God has either imprisoned or exiled. Since we settled, it has become clear God had either been imprisoned or exiled. Special emissaries, descendants of our old priesthood, search all realms for news of God. As yet we receive no satisfactory answer, so meanwhile we rule without benefit of church, without consolation. We cannot demand consolation while God himself has none. Also we rule without emperor or despot, until we come again to Byzantium. All this was given so flat and directly to St. Audrin that I could make no response. Klosterheim seemed the only one of us not confounded. Either he was familiar with their beliefs, or had heard such a multitude of heresies in the course of his long existence that he was unimpressed. This city has not been threatened, continued Nuremberg's lord, for 200 years. The past 150 have been singularly tranquil. I regret I take little interest in Nuremberg's daily affairs, however. I have my books, my drumsticks, my toads. But you must tell me how I can be of service. There came a pause. I looked from Klosterheim's frozen skull to my Libussa, who displayed cool self-control. Klosterheim spoke suddenly. "We've come to seek the Holy Grail, Lord. We know it's here." The Sebastocrator was sceptical. "Well, the Grail is in the hands of Satan. Your ancestor, Count von Beck, delivered it himself. It is as much one of Satan's spoils as the Hagia Sophia, or the great treasure of Jerusalem." "But where's Satan?" said St. Audrin with mocking levity. "Is he not exiled too?" "Well, we have had no dealings with him. I understand Lord Reynard of the Moldavia accepts Satan as his liege. 'Twas from Reynard I heard the story of the Grail. He rules the lesser city." "Did he not speak of Satan's desire to be reconciled with God?" asked Klosterheim in disbelief. The Sebastocrator was dismissive. "We become used to resisting the attraction of rumours. We remain faithful to our vow." "But Satan rules on earth now," said Klosterheim in a furious murmur. "God's charged him with man's salvation." The Sebastocrator heard nothing. For him, God was either exiled or Satan's prisoner. If he was not, then there was no meaning to the prince's exile and imprisonment. He laughed. "Well, Johannes the Wanderer, perhaps you know your own master best." "He's no longer my master." "Then finding the Grail will not be easy, eh? You may search in Nuremberg if it pleases you, of course. Amongst all our citizens, with their multiplicity of interests, you'll maybe discover a clue to its hiding place." He became vague, to ease away any of Klosterheim's meaning. "While you remain in the city, be ever assured of our hospitality." His voice faded. He studied his throne, its cushions, the book resting upon them. "Can we provide anything?" He looked absently over our heads. The interview was finished. The Pan Khyber Sebastos took a step forward, held a hand towards the exit and bowed. Libussa made as if to ask a further question, and then sighed, took my arm and turned to move forward with fierce exhilaration. She plainly thought her time wasted. We were ahead of Lord Andreas. "The man's a fool," she said. "The Grail is here." Well, you cannot be certain, I said. My dear little Beck, I've searched for years. I married my findings with those of the world's greatest alchemists and with Klosterheim's. 1,000 reliable witnesses, seeresses, oracles, demons, men and women raised from the dead, astrologers, necromancers, all agree the Grail's here. Everything is to be achieved in Nuremberg. All signs proclaim it. All logic insists upon it. Her voice rising, she checked it, slowed us down, waited for a politely frowning Lord Andreas, followed by St. Oddrun and Klosterheim, and offered him an insincere apology. Lord Andreas said gently, "You must see how my master cannot accept what you claim. You'd do best to seek out Lord Renyard." "Where's he, sir?" "The lesser city, chiefly the Moldavia quarter, is the thieves' city, so-called. 'Tis dangerous. Lord Renyard lacks the desperation of Byzantium's exiles, though, in a way I suppose he's also exiled." "I thank you, sir," said she. We were outside the palace and standing beside our carriage. Almost hastily Lord Andreas offered us a good fortune and hurried back to his unhappy prince. Klosterheim grumbled. "Moldavia's the second most dangerous quarter in the city." "Why so dangerous?" asked St. Oddrun, who knew the thieves' kitchens of half Europe. "It's ruled as a separate kingdom, like several of Nuremberg's districts. You've seen how little the prince cared for his responsibilities. Lord Renyard's absolute monarch of the lesser city. He's descendant of the race the Byzantines crushed when they first came here. He has no love for them or those resembling them." "So he'll not readily grant us an interview?" said Libussa. We were back in the carriage. The coachman set us in motion. "If we had something worthwhile to offer him, perhaps." Klosterheim licked his lips with a white tongue. "What have we of value? The airship?" "Not yours to dispose of," said St. Oddrun pointedly. "I find it strange you came empty-handed on this mission." He made no mention of our stolen gold. "How many thalers could buy the Grail?" She was contemptuous. "We must go directly to the Moldavian. If Renyard has the Grail, he might not value it. A little clay cup, you said." Klosterheim nodded. "Made by Lilith, for the eventual triumph of humanity over its own nature, over the dictates of God and Satan. A little clay cup, cure for the world's pain. With it we can challenge Lucifer, or bargain with him." "We've heard all this before, sir." He still believed she aided him in his particular schemes. Lilith, she was called. I saw it long ago and did not recognise it. Next time von Beck held the Grail in his hands. Satan took back my soul. He turned to stare out at the city, then banished me again to this body. The Grail could release me. He frowned deeply. I did not recognise her. At that moment I saw all the cold horror of purgatory personified. I was at once repelled and sympathetic. Libussa, however, remained merely impatient. She barely restrained herself from slapping Klosterheim. She hissed under her breath. She looked from me to St. Oddrun and back to the Wanderer. "I had expected to see the Grail, to be the city's greatest treasure," she said, "displayed for all to see, and now we must search the haunts of knaves and billy-pickers. Has anyone a notion of their brand of Rotwelsch?" She had gone abroad in such places often enough to know that each had its own secret language, and one survived by being able to speak at least a little of it. In Spain the argot was called Germania. In Naples it was known as Giorgio, and in London, Kent. "I speak most dialects," said I, "and St. Oddrun also." She was satisfied. "Then we'll go at once. I planned to have the thing by now, and time grows short." St. Oddrun was all mockery. "When metaphysics become the chief concern, practicalities are inclined to be forgotten, your grace." She darted him a terrible glare. He subsided, unrepentant, smiling to himself as if all his views of the world were at once confirmed. She turned her head away so as not to see him, clearly displeased with herself, for she set great store by her superiority over a fallible and untrustworthy world. I too was amused, though I dared not show it. Klosterheim was dogged, far more used to struggle and defeat. Her career had been, in the main, one of implacable success. She felt almost betrayed, yet could find no one to blame. Diplomacy also is needed with Lord Ranyard, said Klosterheim. We'll employ it, sir, said she. She looked at me. I understood you had some sense enabling you to sniff out the Grail. Is there nothing in you telling you where to find it? Not a murder, madam. Not a murmur, madam. Do you take me for some sort of occult bloodhound? My lady softened. A unique and superior bloodhound, my dear. I've no special affinity with the cup, I insisted. Klosterheim unclasped his hands from his lap, leaning forward. You're simply unaware of your birthright and your powers. I am neither compass nor sextant in any realm. My sense of direction, indeed, was never very good, believe me. Klosterheim means you'll recognise it when we're in its presence, she said placatingly. Does it not change shape? Disguise itself? A chameleon amongst chalices. A sentient ale-pot. I scoffed at this. Though it were proof of my lady's gullibility, it did nothing to cool my ardour for her, but it provided some relief from the weight of it all. Oh, madam, there's nothing worse than a faulty chart and useless instruments when one journeys into terra incognita. Klosterheim it was who leaned from the window and shouted up at the driver to change direction for Moldavia, and the driver cried back, I've no instructions from Prince Miroslav. I can only take you to the obelisk, sir. It marks the edge of the district, but I cannot take my master's property into the lesser city. Oh, very well, the obelisk. Klosterheim flung himself back in his seat. Well, friends, have we a pact, a plan to follow through? St. Audrin was disgusted. I've not volunteered for this. I'll return with the carriage and inform our host of your decisions. Should help be needed, at least he might send it to you. We need you for the translating, she said, as if that was an end of it. You've no power over me, madam. I can catch the drift of any mumper's tongue, said I. Very well, she said. As you please, St. Audrin. She glared at him in suspicion, so that St. Audrin laughed aloud. Fear not, my lady. I shan't fly free while you keep my companion with you. Unless, of course, I hear he's dead or no longer desires a comrade. The carriage moved through dark canyons. Here and there candle flames flickered and lanterns gleamed in the steep walls. After some while we stopped in a noisy market square packed with hucksters and customers haggling at their loudest. The square was lit with a mixture of flambeaux, oil lamps, bullseyes, candles and braziers. It stank of fried fish and sausages and sauerkraut, was awash with cheap ale and penny gin. Vagabonds in patched frock coats gathered to bicker over the value of stolen rags. Upright men in tall beaver hats, their shillelaghs under their arms, strode in aristocratic glory, looking with disdain at the mere pudding-snammers and pavement screevers who darted about them. I recognised the market for what it was, not merely a place where thieves congregated, but neutral territory, the border where crime met honest capital and arrived at a compromise. Such places flourished on the edges of the true thieves' quarters of all great cities, and sometimes were even termed rendezvous as a fair description of their function. Here were the dolly shops and translation men dealing in stolen goods, the gutter bloods and tattered finery, often arm in arm with their rum morts, she as covered in stained ribbon and torn lace as he, brought their goods to market, as did the govey burners, pocket nippers, and a generality of rapscallions living off the scraps and leavings of the ruffler's trade. The base of the obelisk, 100 feet of black granite carved with worn, almost indistinguishable bas-reliefs and mysterious alphabets. It was surrounded by wicker baskets, horse tackle, hand carts, sacks, panniers, and the general paraphernalia of a busy market. We stepped down, Klosterheim carelessly, myself boldly, and Labussa with some caution, leaving St. Audrin in the carriage. He would present our apologies to Prince Miroslav. He seemed concerned for me, and I did my best by my demeanour to quell his fears. With Klosterheim leading, we threaded our way through to the back streets lying close to the lesser city. Here were the lodgings of the honest poor, and little shops, decent people at their domestic concerns, a few rowdy alehouses on street corners. But it was as we progressed further that we began to draw antagonistic attention from the populace. Increasingly they took on the familiar appearance of harlots, loungers and petty cribbers. Doubtless Klosterheim's cadaverous features halted more than a few in mid-catcall, and the fact we walked side by side, an unusual trio, gave us pause. My plan was to pose as visiting high picaroons, the cream of roguish society. I trusted that the cant was the same as I'd used during my own time upon the road. When at last we were approached direct, it was by 6 or 7 vagabonds, all hung with pistols and poignards like an iron merchant's window, their wide hats shading already dark faces, their black eyes glittering beneath. The leading jocko, a nearly chinless youth with a beard clinging from his jowls like thrice-used meat strings, challenged us with, "Cast ye daylights on the kitchen cove and a jack-a-legs me, Abrams. Shall us crash to Culls and Jock de Mort?" To my relief I understood every word, not hard to guess since he proposed killing us and carrying off Labussa, so I replied, "Douse ye crow, ye cork-brained cunny wangler, and lift ye Gilgiltha to the finest high Toby Morton any cheese." He was impressed enough to put his fingers to his hat's brim and stand back, grinning. "Dimber dambers, we near mulled our rig and filched ye," and he asked if he could be of service. I told him we were seeking Lord Renyard to present our compliments before we began work. We were stiver cramped, so anxious to start quickly. The picaros fell in with us, and I invented a tale for them, borrowed more from paper than from memory. But they would always take the brightest bait, those fish. And now they hailed another group of sword-sporting ragged bravos standing outside a tavern and debating if that or the Rose and Compass sold the best beer. We were introduced as eminent knights of the road, and 3 of the youths, flattered by our pretence that we were already acquainted with the Lord of Moldavia, promised to escort us. "The fox stalls new rogues this dark man's at Raspatian's in Oropskaya. You're in rum pearl if you're not dry bobbing." So, with our swaggering gutter bow clearing the way for us, we pressed deeper into the tangle of twitterns which form the knotted core of the rookery. At last we reached a railed square upon which momentarily a beam of ochre starlight fell, revealing half-ruined walls, thick climbing lichens and ivies, empty windows, fallen roofs. At the centre were the remains of a formal garden, thoroughly overgrown, but still following the outlines of its original geometry. A path through this chaos of fading cowslips and rosebay willow herb led us to the far side. Here was a large ramshackle building, part wood, part brick, apparently derelict in its upper floors and bearing a painted, unkept sign in the Cyrillic fashion, the first we'd seen in Nuremberg, reading Raspasian, high-class beverages and light suppers. There were 2 rush torches stuck up on the gateposts leading to the basement stairs, and these were the only hint of occupation. Our bravos stood hesitantly beneath the sputtering flames, hands on sword hilts, skittishly awkward, eyes everywhere, attempting an insouciance and succeeding only in comicality, evidence they lived in terror of their vagabond king. "Odd," murmured Labussa to me, "that such a prince should hold his noonday court in a run-down chop shop." "He interviews rogues and passes sentence on transgressors, I told her. We stepped forward, but one of the youths in a greasy billycock hat put his hand upon my arm. Another ran down the slippery stone steps and rapped a complicated tattoo at the basement door, then ran halfway back to stand, half in defiance, half in apology, waiting. Almost immediately the door was flung open, and there stood a barrel-chested buckaroon in the stained and rusted armour of a Selmuk Turk, a half-caste oriental giant, strutting aggressively to the bottom of the steps and glaring. Fröhlich. The words nix under upright men. The high cull chivia. Jan Maundoff, replied the youth, all placation now, and jerked his thumb at me. Yon Torno spells his gentry cover. Toby men all. Yonderd Varder al Vulpino. The giant was cautious, strutting out another yard while Fröhlich fell back bit by bit until he was beside me. Here's the Nipperkin nagpad, Erigis. Clackamonsel. And he had turned, was almost running with his two companions close behind, and was gone. Ergish scowled and ascended another step or two. I told him again we were first-rate highwaymen, seeking his lord's permission to work the territory beyond the lesser city, and to use the quarter as our bolt hole. He pointed out my sword and pistols. Yon'll statch ye pricker and ye poppers aft main. So we handed over our weaponry, whereupon the door was shut firmly in our faces, and we waited in some anxiety until it was opened again. Glaring at us from habit rather than any specific animosity, the Turk admitted us. He led us down a short passage and into a large dark room crowded with tables, many of them empty and dusty save for those at the front. Here upon a low dais, which normally might have presented entertainment to diners, sat a figure in the feathers and lace of a century previous, one of the Sun King's cavaliers. Yet he was oddly proportioned, his face in darkness. On either side of their high cull were rascals in every manner of extravagant costume, lounging in postures of studied boredom and inspecting us with bold, challenging eyes. These were not the street bloods we had met outside, but the top ranks of the thieves' castes, the rufflers and upright men, barons to Lord Renyard's king. Seated in the armchairs at the foot of the dais, and looking almost as bold as their men, were the Altum Morts and Dells, giving off a near-visible cloud of perfume and powder which blended with lace and silks and brought back a memory of the flash nunneries of Stamboul and Barcelona. The tables contained petitioners and prisoners, some bound and under guard. The hall was lit by huge church candles, stuck into massive gold holders, so it seemed the place was on fire. Lord Renyard's imperious lace summoned us forward. He was still in shadow, knowing its effect. He stood up very tall, with eyes glittering suddenly in the light, and they were penetrating, wise. At first I thought he wore a mask, and that he was in some way crippled. But he was neither. When he spoke, his muzzle curled back from sharp white teeth. He was a fox. A huge red-haired beast on hind legs, taller than me and sufficiently manlike to grasp the pommel of his sword and stand in pantaloons and polished buckled pumps, in long embroidered waistcoat, fine lace flowing over everything, like foam down a tankard, silk dress coat near as red as his fur, ribbons here and there, and a heavy dandy pole in his other hand, which doubtless he used to help him stand steady. His expression was curious, but not a whit friendly. His strange voice was close to a bark, and his whiskers twitched. The ostrich plumes of his great hat wobbled, fit to fall off, but it was impossible for that creature to look ridiculous. "Ain't you just a pair of notch-nuzzling flashmen, and their mab ladycock playing the noddy, on the pad yon chive? And where, with no nags?" said he. "Lord Renyard," said I at once. Though I've some claim to be what I told your men, we're here from the Zeitenmakers to see you and beg a boon. I knew it would not be possible for all three of us to pose as highway thieves, and it seemed better to announce the truth, if slightly coloured and flattering to himself, before Lord Renyard guessed it. It seemed I'd sworn foul in church, for the rufflers were close to being outright shocked at my use of conventional German, but Lord Renyard stilled his followers with a gesture of his red hand. He put his long, cunning head to one side, staring at us for a full minute or more. Either I thought we would be torn to pieces, or would be held in the hope of a ransom. There was the faintest chance, however, he would hear us out. I had expected a less clever prince of thieves, and a commoner one. "Yon'll be schollards, nech?" He seemed to muse for a moment. "Aye, sire." I was exhausted of any wit. Then he sat down suddenly with a thump in his great chair, crying, "Well, let's hope, damn me, that at least one of you is familiar with the works of Diderot, for if you're not, there's little point in your admission here, and being Diddycoy nabblers, you'll not allow yourselves back to Swallonia alive, not unless you prove yourselves somehow." He turned his muzzle, grinning. The fox, as you may appreciate, I hope, is bored. I was stunned by all this, and found myself babbling. "I've read the supplement Au Voyage de Bougainville, sir, and other things." "Rêve de l'Alembert," said Libussa, a schoolgirl, little else. "I do not know the gentleman," said Klosterheim in hollow, disapproving tones, reminiscent of his Lutheran origins. Lord Renyard pointed up his snout and laughed, a series of short, high yaps. "I shall not quibble with that. Good enough. Who do you read, sir?" "I'm not in the habit, sir." Klosterheim spoke like a Quaker, invited to the Balum Brancum as guest of honour. "Nor have I been for the past 200 years. This mystery amused the fox. "A fellow more full of ennui than myself. What a novelty! What a mismatched trio of otherworldly travellers you are. A spider-shanked cadaver, a foppish minikin, and a doxy looking like a Rome mort who's just pissed on a nettle." This won the laughter of his crew and put us all the more at ease. "Where are you from, and how did you come here?" "We're Germans, sir," said I. "Come here by air." "So your ship's moored out there, eh? Your credentials are perfect." He turned to his gaudy ruffians. "Nix on the crash. Nor fleecing, nor lumping, nor fuddling. Ban out when starats." And they had obeyed his orders. We should not be harmed. I was certain he would be obeyed. He said in more conventional language to them, "Have you listened, you stains, you whoremongers?" "On record, your worship," said one, fingers to forelock, single calculating eye on us. "What names do you want?" asked another, his mouth red in his blue-black beard. He opened a dog-eared ledger and licked a quill. For my own part, I could not resist giving Tom Rakehell, which would be, in London at any rate, an acceptable alias. But Libussa went the whole hog, with all family names and qualifications. Alchemical adept, member of the Council of Prague, elder of the Brothers of the Sacred Triangle, first of the Triumvirate. She paused. "I have degrees from several universities, and my blood is the blood of Ariadne, older than time." Lord Renyard was pleased. She had read him right, and said, "We've that in common at least, Duchess. I trust you're not here in quest of some other poor man-beast to murder, or is a mere fox unworthy of Ariadne's cunning and Theseus's bludgeon." "No violence at all is intended, my lord. We're in the lesser city for your help, if necessary to trade." "Trading rarities? I'm devilish partial to rarities." "Knowledge," said she. "Rare enough." He resat himself, evidently never comfortable in that chair. "Give me half an hour for my duties, and we'll talk." "Klosterheim," said the ex-captain of Hell, and the brigand noted it in his ledger. We arranged ourselves beside a table at the back and watched as the plaintiffs came and went. Lord Reynard allowed this cut-purser licence, while that one was sentenced to the top, which was hanging, for some mysterious transgression of the vagabond code. Half the proceedings were conducted in the canting tongue, half in such refined language it went over the heads of most of us. For all his graces, he was a fox, high-pitched, staccato, but a fox whose authority was unquestioned, even by those he sent to their deaths. When this court was over, we were summoned forward once more. His followers fell back, most of them looking at us with wariness and disguised dislike, as if somehow we threatened them by parleying so with their master. "So you've read D'Alembert's Dream," said he to me, "and the Encyclopedia?" "Not every word, sir." "I've read all 17 volumes, Tom Rakehell. Thus I know all there is to know of the world. Of your world. I long to visit it. But it would be foolish, eh? Here I'm already a sport. There I'd be a monster. You're familiar with current theories of spontaneous creation, are you?" "Well, not exactly current, sir, those notions. 50 years ago." "A golden age, sir," said the fox. "A better age than this. Voltaire, Rousseau, Buffon, Danbonton, Montesquieu, D'Alembert. How should I have loved to have conversed with them?" "I know several who did, sir. I served at Catherine's court where, as you know, Diderot and Voltaire spent much time." "You knew Diderot?" "Only slightly, Lord Reynard. He was leaving for France as I arrived." "Your date of 74, said the fox, with a knowing nod. "Just so, I was very young." "But he impressed you?" "As a lively, sweet-natured, curious man." "So I've heard." The fox eased his strange body in its chair once more. He alone reached through intellect what the rest of us know by experience. In Bougainville, for instance, he asked, "Who knows the early history of our globe? How many stretches of land now cut off from each other were once joined?" "A mind as lively as Voltaire's, sir, but more humane, eh?" "Quite," said I. The fox stood up. "This way." He pointed to the steps leading to the dais. We mounted obediently. His men surrounded us, all sweat and woman's perfumes, and we were escorted off along a passage, down a flight of steps, to a great underground kitchen where servants roasted meat and prepared vegetables over trembling open fires. Running the length of this chamber was a great oaken table and benches like a monastery's. "We'll feast," said the fox, his red mask enlivened by the fire, "and we'll converse, to ape Catherine's banquets, eh?" We were set with me on his right, Libussa and Klosterheim on his left. Then his delicate muzzle sniffed at beef bones, though he was hard put to lift them in his strange paws, and his lacy sleeves fell always in the juices. The meat was unremarkably cooked, a little on the raw side, and the vegetables were short of salt. But the conversation was one of the strangest I'd attended. He was a thorough student of our Enlightenment. He knew them all by heart. He quoted Voltaire, "Destroyed or degenerate suns make a graveyard of the sky." It was, said the fox, as if Voltaire had actually journeyed to this Nuremberg and seen the firmament for himself. Did we know that autumn star in a local argot meant church prison or God's enclosure? He wondered if it was a name coming from the fate of the Sebastocrator, waiting in his palace for a signal which would never come, and believing therefore that it was God, not himself, who was trapped. Libussa was barely interested in that. Her own obsessions filled most of her mind. Klosterheim, too, listened without much attention. Libussa was hard put in her pride to show patience with philosophers who did not share her somewhat more romantic views. Rousseau was now touched upon. Did he suffer the pox, do you think? Or do you believe what he wrote on the subject in his Confessions? The fox ate daintily, while all around was such a snorting and snuffling, such a clatter of knives on plates, sucking, burping, guzzling. Such a gabble of coarse jests and observations, it was sometimes hard to hear or be heard. Lord Reynard seemed sublimely oblivious of his lieutenant's bestial manners. Klosterheim, though a twice-damned ex-servant of Lucifer, still disapproved in his way of all those non-churchmen and their godless notions. He would have no part in it. But Libussa aired her considerable knowledge. When she allowed it in herself, she displayed a greater taste for metaphysics than I, and was soon in her element. Yet always she steered a course relentlessly towards the Grail, cheerfully inventing references to it by every name the fox revered, until she had arrived in this port. And didn't Diderot, sir, consider the Holy Grail's scientific properties in one of those lately published posthumous works? "Oh, I do not recall, madam," he was apologetic. "It takes many years sometimes to receive books from your world." "Yes, sir, an essay on sentience, sir, and its manifestations, active and latent. He wonders if an inanimate object is capable of volition, the legendary Grail's his example, its tendency to come and go apparently at its own will, to exercise a healing property, to impose peace and order within its influence, to guide, maybe, the affairs of men, or choose to remain dormant. He suggests such an object exerts a change upon its environment for its own survival, and is thus the chief instrument of harmony, perhaps the very pivot of our universe. This Grail, if there be only one, maintains the rhythm of the spheres, yet also aids mankind to act in concert. If God created unity, Diderot suggests, perhaps he also created something to preserve that unity. Another school says the Grail and God are one, possessing power and sentience, but not moral intellect." "God, madam, has abandoned this planet," said the fox, matter of fact. "Is the news so late in reaching you?" "Most refuse belief," murmured Klosterheim. "So," continued Lord Reynard, "maybe another force than Satan seeks to fill God's place. Reputedly, Satan's no pursuer of order." "Satan renounced the easy means to order," said Klosterheim. "By his will and his severity he could rule now. But he refuses. He seeks unity with the very being he once deified. He once defied, and thus abandons all his followers." The fox looked startled, licking his snout before opening his mouth to speak, but Klosterheim interrupted with, "Satan alone rules our planet." He was oblivious of the effect he had. His white face bore the marks of strange tensions within. "The war, when it comes, shall be against him. With the Grail in my hands, sir, I'd soon have hell in full rebellion. Then mankind would be sole master of its destiny." More destiny, thought I. Why had I heard so many differing descriptions as to the exact nature of this inevitable destiny? How could they all be inevitable? Destiny was certainly a word describing an individual's desperate need for certainty. "You'd lead this rebellion?" The fox was deeply curious. "In the name of enlightened science?" "In the name of man," said Klosterheim. "That is our intention." He was unaware of the fox's ironic glint at the word man. "Sir, if you possessed the Grail, your advantage would be served as well as ours." Libussa almost winced. Klosterheim had cut across her pretty, seductive tune with a flat horn. But the fox was amused as he answered Satan's ex-captain. "How can that be? What rational world would permit the existence of such monsters as myself?" "It would be a rational world, sir," said Libussa quickly. "A world setting high store on liberty and self-direction. A world based firmly on the belief that equality is the bedrock of happiness." "Yeah, but France's revolution argued the same." The fox put paw to muzzle, frowning down into gravy-stained lace. "And now unreason is observed at every turn. Intolerance and tyranny." His lips curled back from pointed teeth, a vulpine smile. "Worse than mine." "Von Beck here was a deputy in France, sir." Libussa hardly knew which tack to take. She was so discomfited. "He'll tell you why the revolution did not succeed." Von Beck, Lord Renyard was delighted. Follower of Klutz? Tom Rakehell, sir, if you don't mind. I prayed he would respect the rogue's code and not make inquiries of me. Forgive me, Tom. You were saying, madam. Libussa was baffled, and then grimly she said, He'll confirm they lack wisdom. She took a breath, furious with both Klosterheim and myself. And, sir, they lack the Grail. 'Tis insufficient that a few lawyers form a parliament and make fresh laws. If mankind would change, great upheavals are in order. A new age, born from the destruction of the old. One tiny nation's floundering revolution, in which only half the population's represented, if that, is useless. Of course it must collapse. We must have fundamental change, sir. Out of chaos shall come order. That order based upon a harmony hitherto unguessed at, whose great symbol is Hermaphrodite, the woman-man. Theseus and Ariadne combined against the beast. Not a beast like yourself, sir. The beast is all that's stupid, brutal, unthinking, greedy in man. The beast is selfish, unjust, cruel. Its swaggering posturing and the simple pleasures of war. Its harem-keeping. It's using the female sex to maintain the vanity of the male at woman's great expense. Today the beast speaks in the accents of civilized democracy, but he is still the beast. Klosterheim grew puzzled, as if unsure she'd understood what he required of her when the Grail was theirs. Hermaphrodite, sir, is more terrifying to the male race than ever you could be. I am flattered, madam. Hermaphrodite shall be the leader of this true revolution, as long as strong, as eloquent, as divine as Jesus. Hermaphrodite must take the same terrible path as Christ, for that is the price paid if one's to influence the course of history. A leader who no longer spreads the word of God, but spreads the word of humanity. This being shall incorporate the experience, the hopes and idealism of our whole race, the sum of male and female experience, the sum we've all learned. The Grail's our true salvation, sir. The fox picked up a chicken and lifted it to his sardonic mouth. No room for monsters. No room for those who'd fear singularity, sir. She was glib. Any reasoning world would reckon itself rich with Lord Renyard in it. The fox looked hard at me. I would support her, but I knew not how. He gave Klosterheim a stare. The skull-faced ex-priest attempted to absorb the meaning of Libussa's rhetoric. Good flattery, madam, said Renyard, chewing, but poor observation. By whatever logic the times require, we all know how one species will destroy another. As for those hybrids like me, we're lucky if we're merely isolated. And isolation produces a kind of inescapable madness, though it adopts a guise like mine of rationality and breeding. Your sexes are not equal, as you say. Your colours war one against the other. The Arab race, calling itself the white race, despises red and black. The red race, calling itself the white race, despises brown, black and yellow. The yellow race, calling itself the favoured race, makes war upon another yellow race, calling itself the favoured race. Can all that be banished by your Grail? She was sincere. Aye, sir. He put down the torn chicken. I can't believe you, madam. This new Messiah would not do for me. I'm better off upon the edge of chaos, in my criminality and my kingship over thieves and whores. My rufflers are easily understood. Those who fear the singular also fear the sword. His glance towards his gorging captains and their doxies was meaningful and tolerant. You support your vanity, sir, by consorting only with inferiors, she said. That's your argument, I think. Madam, I have no equals. The Grail shall change the world, sir, so all stupidity is banished, and we'd begin as equals. Your case remains unproved, madam. It does not attract me. 'Twould put an end to your boredom, sir. He placed both paws before him on the table and laughed again, as field foxes laugh, with a little bark and head half lifted. His tail would have fanned if he'd had one. I wondered if he'd docked it to fit his fancy breeks. "I'd fear your price, madam," he added softly. She had a puzzled smile upon her own lips and seemed not entirely sure of him. "But you'd take a risk, sir, if offered." His head came forward, bearing its huge scarlet hat and host of ostrich plumes, so his face was hidden again. He spoke from beneath the brim. "I owe you something, to be sure, for this entertainment." Raising his head again, he reached for damask and wiped his greasy muzzle. Then, unconsciously, he licked his nose. "I do not possess your mystic cup." He smiled, and his freshened whiskers fluttered. "Otherwise I might well barter it for some of those recent volumes you've mentioned. Indeed, I hope there's still room for trade between us. But if you'll make me a promise, I'll be glad to help you towards your goal. It seems we are, if not of mutual interests, at least of mutual intellect." He now reached under his buttons and pulled a small leather-bound sextodecimo from the back of his pantaloons. His paws fumbled a little. They were hardly fitted even for the turning of pages. I guessed his forelegs shook with the strain of seeming easy. His brain was not at odds with what he read, though his body was indeed at odds with his brain's commands. I began to understand his claims of isolation. "The promise, sir?" I felt considerable respect for this mysterious creature. He showed me the book. I opened it. It was wonderfully printed in sharp black type on pure white paper, with red decorative capitals and so forth. It was called, in German, A New Understanding of the Universe, and I did not recognize the author at all. It was an impressive mouthful, more associated with the 17th century than the 18th. Philachus Grossus von Trommenheim. I wondered where he had obtained such an unusual book in that condition. "I don't know it, sir. I saw it was printed in Nuremberg and dated 339 A.B. Meaningless to me. The prose was exquisite, perhaps a little stiff, some sort of essay on perception." "I'm surprised I've never come across it, sir. It's not the usual dull stuff." "Keep it, sir," Lord Reynard gestured. "'Tis by myself. A single copy was printed, and there's only me to read it here. My real name's on it, and my real vocation, I suspect, is displayed. You'll keep the promise?" "Of course, my lord." Libussa was eager as she leaned forward. Perhaps she thought there were secrets in those pages. Lord Reynard waved his paw at me again, and I slipped the little book into my shirt lining. "What must we swear?" she asked. His bright eyes still regarded mine. "To remember me," he said. There was unusual pain in his expression. Next he was looking at Libussa, his chin up, sly and charming. "I'd want you to send books you think would interest me. Goethe's work whets my palate for more, and certain Englishmen, Burke for instance, and the North Briton, Hume, though my reading in their language is inadequate." "It will be impossible, sir, not to remember you." Momentarily Libussa forgot diplomacy and could not flatter. Without remarking my appearance, he took a pewter chalice of wine in both paws, drinking deep. Is a gigantic fox a scholar first, or a freak? And a speaking fox at that? Make him a fox dressed in foppish flounces and commanding a nation of rogues in a city which scarcely ever sees light man's, as days known here. Why, how could you resist retailing this wonder? A marvel, a sensation. Oh, I'll live on as a performer in some distant circus of the imagination, and 'twill become impossible to tell if it was ever really fact or fiction, this upright fox. They shall announce in voices loud enough to drown out already shrieking dinner guests, was, moreover, An enthusiast for the encyclopedists. He paused then. Ah, a man in a mask, surely, they'll say next. A hoax. Some poor creature with a hideous deformity. Well, perhaps one's memory is not all it might be. Perhaps Lord Reynard was merely a cripple using his disfiguration to control the brigands. He could become quite human before the century's out. Remember me? He drank again. He smiled at Libussa. He winked at Klosterheim. An ear twitched and his hat fell slightly to one side, giving him a still more rakish look. Well, he said, if we're to believe Voltaire, a taste for marvels engenders systems, but nature seems to take pleasure in uniformity and constancy, just as our own imagination likes great changes. This seemed mockery of Libussa's heart-cry. So Reynard's an aberration. Yet Diderot celebrates chance and difference. Perhaps that's why I love him. Do you love him too, madame? He grinned, drank, and again wiped the muzzle on fresh linen. I'll need no more Monsieur Voltaire, but if you could see I'm sent Maupertuis, I'd perhaps enjoy him better. Sir, said the Duchess of Crete, if it's within my power, you shall have the entire bibliotheca. You're extravagant, madam. You shall have all I can tell you of any substance. Everything else you must discover for yourself. I recall a meeting some time past when I learned the story of von Beck, Klosterheim, and the Grail. This is slim reward for having been bored by an undereducated, not to say vulpine, jack-thief, and at such length, but here it is. He considered what he had to say, lifting his red snout towards the shadowy beams and staring at flickering tallow. His words were measured, significant, yet almost whispered. You must find the Red O'Dowd. He slumped a little in his chair. Evidently this statement cost him something of value, and moreover had exhausted him. Kitchen fires danced and crackled. Lord Reynard looked sadly across the table at Tom Rakehell, already protecting himself from despair should Tom fail him. His followers guzzled obliviously, and he grew tender as he regarded them. He was a humane monster, ruling bestial men. I could almost smell the Minotaur's fetid breath pouring from his flaring nostrils, and hear the angry stamping of hoofs upon hard earth. A massive club beat against strong walls. The ground shook. The bull screamed his challenge. Theseus advanced through the labyrinth, and reason took up sword against brute ignorance. Libussa dropped her eyes and spread her wide hands on the table, as if in shame.